Ex-cons, what crimes are respected, disrespected, and why? Alright, let's get real. Any major crime involving harming others, armed robbery, you name it, might earn you some respect from certain inmates. But here's the thing, if you strut into prison or county jail boasting about your crimes, mark my words, be prepared for anything. Many inmates, gangs included, have been behind bars for so long that their pride and respect from fellow inmates are all that they've got. So if you're there to win a popularity contest, well, buddy, you're gonna lose big time. Now, on to the predator debate. When it comes to any against the opposite gender or children, they've got a designated spot called PC, protective custody. Most with charges like that have the sense to check into PC the moment they arrive, but let me tell you, that doesn't always keep them safe. Here's an example. Man A lands in prison for or something similar to Man B's child. Within minutes, Man A spots Man B, also locked up. Man A panics and tells guard he fears for his life, heading straight for protective custody. Man B catches wind of this and does the same. Now, let your imagination fill in the gaps. I've witnessed this exact scenario in county jail. Yeah, well, just imagine if those creeps end up in some third world prison. Gonna be open season for the inmates. Anyway, I know what you're going to say. Hey Rufus, this is a re-upload. Nope, it's not. You wanted more and I heard you, so I hope you guys enjoy part 2 of crimes that are respected and are hated in prison. Story 2. To understand this, you need a bit of background on prisons. I'll keep it concise without diving into a whole novel on prison culture. Every prison forms its own mini-society with rules and norms varying from one to another, even from unit to unit. So, respect in prison? It's a shifting concept. It depends on who you're seeking it from. For instance, a low-level gang member respects those he considers the toughest in the gang but might disregard someone in prison for taking out a kitty fiddler. In prison, people often yearn for their families, so any crime related to women or children hits hard. Inflicting harm messes you up big time, while standing up for them boosts your respect level. Kids hold more sway than women, but both matter. Also, committing big crimes draws admiration from both good and bad inmates. Those who pull off intricate scams or robberies against big institutions like banks or through credit card fraud earn respect for their wit and smarts. Acts where you take the fall for someone else without snitching, those carry significant respect. But honestly, respect truly comes from your actions behind the bars. Words fly around easily and stories often get exaggerated. Everyone's aware of that game. Story 3. Traditionally within the prison hierarchy, causing harm to others ranked highest, followed by armed robbery, money-related crimes like related offenses and burglary, and then individuals labeled as predators. However, the key factor often lies in how people carry themselves rather than the specific crime that landed them in prison, except for crimes of an intimate nature which typically lead straight to protective custody. Generally, the more violent an individual appears, the more respect they garner among inmates. In my case, being in prison for armed robbery didn't result in any altercations. Many tested me, trying to see if I would back down, but no one decided that I was a coward. Also, it's surprising to some, but the people you encounter in prison are often individuals you might find in an average troubled neighborhood. Recently in court, I saw a guy who actually lives down the street from me. From those coming from wealthy, exclusive areas, prison life can be really challenging. In contrast, people from tough neighborhoods have often already acquired the necessary survival skills merely by growing up in such environments. Story 4. This isn't my story, but it's about someone I know, the cause and the crime. So my cousin went through something terrible. He was by his dad's friends, and his dad was unaware of it. After this awful incident, there was a fight with his mother and he was left an abandoned child. Afterward, a string of unfortunate events pushed him into a deep depression. He turned to heavy drinking and became a though not excessively. Then while driving under the influence, he was stopped by a police officer. The officer didn't check if my cousin was hammered, but in a moment of distress, my cousin ended up hurting the officer, resulting in a 2 to 3 month stint in jail. Once released, he grew tired of alcohol, turned his life around, and now has a wife, kids, and a supportive family. My family only found out about the violation when my cousin got arrested. Regarding the aftermath, initially my cousin wasn't respected and faced hostility because he hit a police officer, someone perceived as a helper and protector of citizens. However, upon learning about his traumatic past and struggles with alcohol, people began to sympathize and respect him. One of his friends even introduced him to a therapist. This story was known throughout our neighborhood, just not within our family. Story 5. Crimes targeting the elderly, women, or children will make you constantly watch your back in prison. If you have a record of similar offenses and end up in the general population, it's only a matter of days before you face the consequences of your actions. Taking action to defend a child or seeking revenge for one is highly respected in prison, as well as any form of crime against those who had been violent towards women, children, or their families. These quote-unquote noble crimes aimed at protecting women or children certainly gain a lot of respect. Most notorious criminals are also respected, but it's more of a common sense thing rather than specifically for the crime they committed. During my time in jail, I shared a pod with the regional leader of a certain biker gang. Nearly everyone there respected him, and those who didn't or disobeyed his orders were immediately moved to protective custody. He managed to create an environment where there was minimal targeting of the young, naive, or vulnerable in the pod. For instance, while he was around, there were hardly any instances of stealing from the prison store. It was because he made it clear that preying on the weak would result in severe consequences. That gang leader sounds like a real OG, and I get that maybe it's in prison and we're all stuck there with one another, but if you had to look up to someone, that seems like the type of man I'd like to look up to if I were in prison. Hopefully I won't have to be. Are you enjoying these tales about ex-cons? Then do please give this video a thumbs up. By the way, I've got a lot more videos just like this, so please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out, and thank you for watching. Story 6. As many have already pointed out, harming women, children, animals, or the elderly is universally condemned in prison. My grandma was incarcerated with Myra Hindley before jails were segregated, based on the nature of one's crimes. She was there for petty theft, and they say she confronted Hindley and harmed her. To those of us who didn't know who Hindley was, she was involved in the Moors murders, a series of horrifying crimes committed by Ian Brady and herself between July 1963 and October 1965 in the Greater Manchester area, England. The victims, 5 children, Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans, suffered unimaginable horrors, with at least 4 being despicably. The term Moors murders was coined because 2 victims were found in graves on Saddleworth Moor, while a third was discovered in 1987, over 2 decades after Brady and Hindley's trial in 1966. The body of a 4th victim, Keith Bennett, is suspected to be buried there, yet despite numerous searches, it remains undiscovered. Story 7. While I'm not an ex-convict myself, I did work alongside several at a previous job. What are the most disrespected offenses? Without a doubt, crimes against children top the list. Many individuals involved in such acts end up in protective custody to avoid physical retaliation from fellow inmates. Crimes that demand meticulous planning, strategic execution, and skill often earn respect within the prison community. That's the impression I gathered from my interactions. Furthermore, being labeled a punk or a drab typically demands a fight. You might not win, but showing you're willing to stand up for yourself is important. Failing to do so could result in being treated as a target. Story 8. While I'm not an ex-convict myself, a friend shared insights about the dynamics in prison. Predators and informants require protection from other inmates as they're considered the lowest on the social ladder. Crimes like selling or burglary are somewhat accepted without much consequence. You won't typically face violent repercussions for those offenses. Harming others can swing either way based on the circumstances. Harming a child usually leads to severe consequences like being targeted, possibly even attacked. On the other hand, harming someone who disrespected you might earn you respect or acknowledgement within certain circles. Story 9. During a visit to my high school, an inmate shared a disturbing story about a seemingly nice guy in prison. He was open about his charges and interacted with other inmates, playing cards and such. When word got out about his crime involving children, those same inmates turned on him and roughed him up brutally. Crimes related to children, the elderly, or anyone who can't defend themselves are viewed with extreme disdain. The inmate who spoke at my school even mentioned that they made sure disabled inmates were protected and had their needs met. While prisoners might have committed crimes, many of them still adhere to a certain code of ethics. They do have families, kids, and a sense of right and wrong. That should be a clear message to all the kitty fiddlers out there. Story 10. Truth be told, except for being labeled a snitch, nothing much phases inmates as much as Hollywood depicts. The notion of kitty fiddlers having a tough time in the yard is mostly movie hype. When you move to a new yard, everyone faces the same assessment. Either you stand your ground or you're considered weak, labeled as a sissy. Now and then, some people are already judged for their reputation, especially if they're a kitty fiddler who someone related to another inmate in the same facility. Those kinds of inmates are likely to face consequences. However, the politics in prison mostly revolve now around race, contraband, and connections. Not the 1950s anymore. As the world changed, so did the inmates, and they seem to have lost some of their humanity along the way. Story 11. In prison, the respected ones are the older people who just keep quiet. Surprisingly, it's often the small-time offenders in for related charges who face the physical aggression, second only to kitty fiddlers. My husband served 3 years for a non-violent, non-gender-related felony, growing grass, big deal, and he shared that he enjoyed spending time with the older inmates. They simply minded their own business and focused on getting through each day. He also witnessed an incident where a predator faced brutal retaliation. A group charged at the person. My husband admitted he felt zero sympathy for the guy. Those who do harm children or are involved in despicable crimes like that always end up facing the consequences. And according to him, they rightfully deserve it. Story 12. In prison, it's not solely about the crime committed, but rather about the determination and resolve of the individual. The power and respect within the system often depend on what someone is willing to do compared to others. Now, from what I've gathered from ex-convicts, unless you're a predator of some kind, you're more or less just another inmate. However, if you happen to fall into that category, it's a different story altogether. It could mean severe consequences or even putting your life in danger, but this is only what I've heard. Story 13. Escaping from prison is very risky. I have a close family member who made an attempt. He came close but ultimately failed. As a consequence, he received additional time added to his sentence and spent an extra 6 months in solitary confinement. However, when he returned to the general prison population, he was surprisingly treated like a hero by fellow inmates. Story 14. Respect in prison isn't typically earned through the nature of one's crime. As a rule, inmates generally avoid discussing their offenses while in prison. There are several reasons behind this practice. For one, many people are in various stages of appeal, and boasting about their actions could jeopardize their legal process. Additionally, you never know if someone in the facility knew your victim, so bragging about it is a risky move. Moreover, most inmates aren't exactly proud of being caught and in prison anyway, so there's nothing much to boast about. On the other hand, crimes involving children are significantly frowned upon by the general inmate population. Individuals guilty of such offenses are often segregated from the general prison population, reducing the chances of quote-unquote prison justice being carried out on them. Story 15. Traditionally, according to mob bosses, those respected in the criminal world were individuals known for bank robberies and harming cops. However, that perception has changed over time. Bank robbers, once treated like royalty, no longer enjoy the same status, largely due to an increase in such crimes perpetuated by Some recent incidents showcase the haphazard nature of certain attempted bank robberies. In Queens, New York City, an unemployed shoe salesman entered a bank, handed a note to the teller demanding specific denominations of money, and left. Within 15 minutes, he was caught at a nearby motel. In another instance in Los Angeles, 2 armed robbers had everyone in the bank lying on the floor. However, when there was no one left to collect the money, the pair hesitated before fleeing in a panic. Lastly, in Salt Lake City, a would-be robber approached a teller and demanded money, and as the teller began gathering it, the person fainted. Story 16. Former inmate here. I spent nearly 2 decades behind bars. Let me give you a little insider perspective. Back in my early days within the system, things were pretty messed up. To take down a predator, you pretty much had to land yourself in prison first. They used to throw these individuals in protective custody, keeping them untouchable. Then came the system overhaul. They locked down all the gang members and generally violent convicts 24/7, isolating them from others. So if anyone thinks their loved one's offender is facing constant retribution in prison, well, they're in for a disappointment. Prison isn't where that kind of justice is served. It's more like hell. The most respected crimes inside prison? It's standing up for yourself. Win or lose, engaging in a fight in defense of yourself earns you that respect. Peace comes after a battle, no matter the outcome. Story 17. I had a friend who received a 5-year sentence for forgery, and surprisingly, he was treated with a certain level of admiration inside jail. It seems forgers are uncommon enough to earn some degree of respect. In the UK prisons, the apex figures were the blaggers, or people willing to use weapons while committing crimes, an exceptionally rare occurrence. This is what I've heard, at least. Story 18. There was talk within the prison walls about an accountant accused of a heinous crime, allegedly fatally harming his wife. Yet within the confined corridors, he garnered a certain respect for his skills. Instead of languishing in despair, he found himself cooking the books for the warden, getting involved in shady activities that only served to deepen his reputation among inmates. As time went on, the accountant, seeking justice of his own, strategically turned the tables on the warden by gathering evidence and handing it over to the authorities. It reminds me of the movie Shawshank Redemption, where a man was unjustly convicted of a heinous crime. He found himself entangled in a web of deceit and corruption, helping the guards and fraudulent activities. Wanting to be free again, he orchestrated an elaborate escape from Shawshank, revealing the nefarious acts of corruption among the prison guards. Story 19. I just finished a 2-year stint for a racing accident. Respect in prison isn't about being a tough guy or taking a life. When you're new, expect trials, people trying to test you and take your stuff, partly out of desire and partly to see how vulnerable you are. Talking your way out doesn't cut it. Sometimes you just gotta put up your fists and fight. Even if you face physical harm, it earns you respect and secures your belongings, food, clothes, tobacco, because they do prey on the weak. It's a community, so don't be selfish. If I had something, my cellmates and buddies had it too. Weakness just won't cut it in there. Sounds like prison is like the wild, man. You gotta show strength and respect to your cellmates if you want to make it out alive. Story 20. During my husband's 3 years in state prison, he found that it wasn't about the specific crime he'd committed. Rather, it was about something else entirely. It boiled down to standing firmly, showing resilience, and refusing to tolerate anyone's nonsense. In that environment, being assertive and standing up for yourself, regardless of the circumstances, earned you the respect of fellow inmates. It wasn't about the nature of your offense, it was more about displaying a sense of self-worth and refusing to be pushed around. Story 21. From my experience as a former inmate, the ones you really want to avoid stirring any trouble with are those who have harmed others before. It's scary to sit across someone who's taken a life and has nothing left to lose. These people aren't always the stereotypical quote-unquote silence of the lambs types. They might just be regular people caught in a terrible series of events, perhaps triggered by alcohol or other circumstances. Waking up in a cell with no memory due to a blackout from a night of drinking, realizing they'll never be free again, that's the kind of person you'd want to steer clear of in prison. Story 22. It wasn't me, but a friend of mine gained significant respect when he arranged for his girlfriend to go south on him while he stepped out to do laundry by the van. They were spotted, leading to his brief time in solitary. Yet when he returned to the general population, he received considerable respect. Story 23. I'm based in Alabama. There's a perception unique to the southern U.S. With the majority of the prison population being black, there's a belief that causing harm to a or a police officer earns considerable respect from the inmates. Additionally, there might even be bonus recognition for harming a cop affiliated with the Well, I can't say I blame those convicts for feeling the way they do. They have been through a lot. And that's a wrap on this one. Thank you for watching. If you want to hear more tales from the Slammer, be sure to check out Ex-Cons. What's the worst thing you've seen in prison? Story 5 was incredibly shocking. I'll see you there.